This is part two of my awakening experience that I talked about in my previous video. So, just to quickly summarize, I had a devastating breakup in around junior year of college, and I fell into a very deep depression and eventually found information about enlightenment and non duality and all of these concepts that I had never been open to before, and decided that I would rather be sane or insane and happy than sane and depressed. And so I decided to keep learning about these subjects until they were able to penetrate my mind enough and I experienced the truth that was behind all of these things. And so basically, for the first time, I saw clearly that what I essentially am is not Lauren or the ever changing thoughts and body and emotions that I had always taken myself to be. And in fact, my true identity is the ever present awareness in which all of those experiences appears. And that is the very same awareness that is watching this video right now. So I, at this time, felt like I had found the secret to life. My world became full of wonder and joy and peace as my ego fell away, and I experienced life from a brand new perspective as the universe itself living through a human called Lauren. And during this time, I unconsciously started to believe that by transcending my humanness, I had also transcended all of my human problems as well, that I would never suffer again because the pure joy and happiness and novelty of this experience was so intense. I could not imagine a world where it would ever go away. I thought I was just going to be walking on sunshine for the rest of my life, but that is not what happened. Months later, the novelty of this greatest discovery of my entire life faded, and I was left with the one thing I had been running away from for my entire life, which is myself. So I spent the next decade trying to get that experience back. I became completely and utterly obsessed with learning about spiritual traditions, reality, the mind, emotions, and personal development. And to some extent, it worked. I had a lot more awakening experiences, but to my dismay, they always faded. And so I then set my sights on what I'd come to believe was the pinnacle of human achievement, enlightenment. Just what I anticipated to be this pure, unadulterated, everlasting awakening and the ceaseless peace and joy that came with that. But as I worked to build a new life in the real world, old familiar patterns started to show up: overwhelm, anxiety, depression, and crippling self doubt. I judged myself for not being present enough. I judged myself for not being awake enough, enlightened enough, and able to consistently rise above my ego and all of its silly human problems. So that just made me want to research more and learn more and gather more information on this search for everlasting enlightenment. So this cycle of seeking and seeing and falling and judging went on for years. This was also exacerbated by the fact that when I had this experience originally, my understanding of what is possible in the world completely shifted. I realized that anything is possible. Like, all of these restrictions I had were just thoughts, and thoughts are not real. They are not reality. And so I could do anything that I wanted and be anything that I wanted. And I started becoming really obsessed with becoming an entrepreneur, doing my own thing. And I actually made videos about this experience all that time ago. Um, But I digress. I got really obsessed with this whole idea of making business, but it felt like the more I stepped into this like real world again, not the reality I had seen underneath the real world, I started to lose myself as all of these, thought patterns came up and the old habits and the old ways of seeing myself. I just kept getting more and more entrenched in those again. For a while, I could see it happening and I would take a break and go sit in my room and meditate and like get back to that state, but eventually it became more and more seemingly difficult to remain present, to remain awake. And, uh, you know, throughout this time, I got married, I started businesses, I moved across states, I found success, I pursued therapy, and to my dismay, these old patterns never truly went away, and somehow they only seemed to get worse. And even though I had spent all this time collecting all this information about, what is actually going on here and what I am not, I just at some point couldn't even listen to that information anymore. Like, I went from printing shirts, I used to print shirts full time, so for 40 hours a week, I would listen to videos and podcasts and all this stuff talking about enlightenment and non duality and, presence and mindfulness and all this stuff, to becoming very obsessed with trying to build something in, again, real life. And business and hustle culture and all of the shit that was not serving me, and it just like crashed into my old identity in a way that was very overwhelming. And so despite in the past couple years reaching or exceeding all of the external milestones I had set for myself, my stress and burnout and anxiety and depression reached a climax. And, at some point in the beginning of this year, I started desperately asking the universe for a sign of what to do. And my answer came in the form of psychedelic mushrooms. I'll tell that story on a different video, but the takeaway is that that trip allowed me to face myself fully, and it became clear that my suffering did not come from a lack of enlightenment. It came from a lifetime of abandoning myself. As a child, I had to abandon myself to survive my household. As a teenager, I abandoned myself to drugs and alcohol and relationships. And as an adult, I abandoned myself to this idea of transcendence. For basically that entire time, I thought awakening was about escaping my humanity, waking up from the matrix, transcending this messy, emotional, inconvenient parts of being a human, but that is incorrect. I had taken something like beautiful and genuine, this recognition of my true nature as the universe itself, as consciousness itself, and turned it into the most sophisticated escape I had ever come up with. Because if I was the universe, I didn't have to be Lauren. If I was pure awareness, I didn't have to identify with the parts of myself that still believed that she was broken and unlovable. And I really thought I could transcend my humanness, but in reality, I've just found the perfect place to hide from it. So after all this time, what I finally understand is that the real work was never about escaping my humanity. It was about fully inhabiting it. It was necessary to have this shocking experience that like catapulted me out of my self. And I took that to the extreme, and then was shot all the way back to my normal self, if you will, with this spiritual understanding. And I was just judging myself because I wasn't here again or still. And over time, this is what people are talking about, where, these awakening experiences, they're just experiences, but you are always there underneath whatever experience is happening, whether it feels negative or positive or whatever. So, the recognizing my true nature did change something very fundamental. The grip of I am my mind and I am my body and I am this human called Lauren loosened, but my mind and my body did not disappear, and neither did all of the parts of myself that I had spent my entire life running away from, abandoning. And these parts had always been sitting on the sidelines, basically waiting for me to fully embrace them. I think one of the traps that people fall into when they first get into the idea of awakening or enlightenment is you have such an intense experience and such a lived understanding of what is being spoken of, that you then feel like you have to run away from the everyday, your average everydayness, and live in this enlightened state that never ends. Nothing ever bothers you, nothing ever touches you. And I really feel like if that was true, you wouldn't be here in this physical life, having to pay rent, having to feed yourself and do all these things. And so the next step in my personal evolution is to embrace the human part of me while understanding myself to be much more than that individual human. So this looks slow and unglamorous, and it happens one day at a time. It's inhabiting my body instead of detaching from it. It's meeting my emotions with love and curiosity instead of trying to transcend them. And it's learning to listen to myself and trust what I actually hear. Trusting my own answers instead of the external answers that I've been chasing for so long, and reconnecting with my needs and my wants. And this is the real work I spent a lifetime avoiding. Even through that awakening phase, I didn't work on any of this. I just thought, okay, well, now I don't have to, because I'm not even a person anymore. I'm just the universe. And again, I don't think that's how it works. The next step is, fully embracing myself and becoming even more human. And that's partially what I want this YouTube channel to be, is a record of that journey of experiencing yourself on all these different levels. Yes, it is true that you're not essentially a person, and in the sense that you are so much more than that. That quote about being the universe experiencing itself through a human, that is essentially accurate, but that does not negate the fact that we are here on this planet with trauma, with a nervous system that needs to be calmed and integrated and embodied into this understanding. And so I used to think that was the answer to life, the end all be all. I had figured it all out, and now I'm realizing that there's still this embodiment work to do, where you take that understanding and you bring it into everyday life. It's not saved for an ashram somewhere. It's not saved for a meditation cushion or some cabin in the woods where you go and sit and be yourself. This is an everyday life. Every single thing that you are surrounded with and experience is part of this understanding of oneness. And it's beautiful when I am able to bring myself back to that understanding, even in my everyday life, and maybe especially in my everyday life, because for the longest time I was trying to escape this everyday life again to find myself in that beautiful transcended space. But again, like, that is just an experience, just like the mushrooms were just an experience. And even during that mushroom experience, they like made it very clear, like, this is not everything. Like, your everyday life is the ultimate experience of truth, and it's not meant to be escaped. It's meant to be lived fully and embodied fully and respected, even when it's hard, even when it's easy, even when it seems silly and not important enough. I can feel my brain going in a bunch of different directions about what I could possibly say here, but I also feel like it's a good time to end this video on this point. To summarize, I lived my whole life thinking I was an individual human with individual human problems. In college, I realized that I am so much more than that, and I'm creating this reality, and I am reality itself. I got lost in reality again, but I can only say that because I expected that enlightenment, that awakening, to last forever, and that was never the point. It was just to shock the system out of this identification with the life so that I could keep living, knowing myself as Lauren and also as something so much more. And integrating those two understandings is what life is about and what I'm doing now. So if you're interested in following along with any of this, I encourage you to subscribe, and I will speak to you later. Bye.